what is happening on the JRE fringe views and online psychopaths. Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson got together, started talking about how do you trust the people online. It felt like Jordan was doing a little bit of a mop up from the Douglas Murray video. Jordan says a few interesting things. Now, I think largely I agree with Jordan Peterson in this. There are people who are going to try to manipulate the podcast world, the YouTube world, the internet world, whatever. But I think Jordan makes the same mistake that Douglas Murray makes, which is he doesn't trust that people are smart enough to filter truth for themselves. Douglas Murray seemed to think that, but I don't think Joe Rogan thinks that. I don't think that. I think people are largely smart, and I think we can use the tools that are in front of us to filter those fringe encounters. When I posted the video, I'll go like this. I had this idea in my mind. Plato wrote dialogues for the same reason Joe Rogan has a podcast. People are curious about truth and they desire new ideas to examine. Now, this actually came from Jew psychology. Mention this. Maybe the reason we like podcasts has something to do with why Plato almost exclusively wrote in dialogue. Now, this was before I posted this, so Drew, we're thinking along the same lines here. Plato wrote dialogue to give people a bird's eye view of a conversation. That's what a podcast is. We sit in a bird's eye view over Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson. We are not having to attend to the conversation the way Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson have to attend to each other. We can attend in something of a more objective way, just as you would reading Plato's dialogues. So Plato's writing these sort of dialogues of Socrates, kind of anticipating how we would eventually use podcasting. And I find that to be fascinating. So that just sort of popped out of the conversation that I was having with Parker Brown. So now back to this post where Annie Crawford jumps in. That's the thumbnail. I got a little Joe Rogan and Annie Crawford crossover here for you. What is happening on JRE and other good podcasts has actually been happening for thousands of years. So this, again, sort of a nod to the dialogue, the sort of form that Plato was writing. So Annie Crawford, I felt like this was one of those natural internet reactions of like, have you read Plato? When you hear someone talk about something you're familiar with, which Annie is, but in a way that you're not maybe familiar with it, you're like, are we even speaking the same language? And so, initially I was like, oh, geez, I touched a nerve here. In fact, I think I've covered some of Annie Crawford's commentary on X before this. So this might even be the second time Annie's ideas and thoughts make an appearance. And so that's what I think, this is not what I was leaning on. He didn't think most people should be engaging in dialectic because they weren't virtuous enough. And I will have to reread The Republic maybe, and maybe I should ask Annie specifically for a reference for this. But I do see that, right? You do see that a little bit in Plato. I could even think of, Socrates mentions like the myth of the metals, these people with golden souls, silver souls, and bronze souls. But he introduces that idea as a noble lie. So and I don't think that's what Annie is talking about, but that's what popped into my head. So Socrates introduces this idea that he doesn't even really believe in. So virtue is required to engage in the dialectic. What do you think about that? Virtue is required to engage, or they weren't virtuous enough. So we shouldn't allow them to come and do this philosophy. I mean, is that in a way what Douglas Murray was saying? These people are not experts. They should not talk. Or even is there some virtue at work in good podcasting? The curiosity, the love of wisdom, as any good philosopher needs to have. Is that what we're seeing on some level when we witness, the podcasts that we like, not technically, virtues, but yeah, is there a desire there for truth and honesty and a courage there that would be a virtue, a courage and willingness to be vulnerable that makes good podcasting good, and bad podcasting bad when they're not willing to be vulnerable. So there's something there, right? Plato and good podcasters use dialogue to filter truth. That's what I was trying to bring to people's attention. I'm not making a statement about whether they are Democrat or populist, but rather how do they treat ideas? And I see the same curiosity in Joe Rogan as I see in Socrates in the Republic. So I quote this. This is the opening line of the Republic from Socrates. And so shout out to Alan Bloom. His translation of the Republic, I think, is really great. He gives you a lot of notes, and he really does help you guide. He really does guide you through the Republic. I went down yesterday to the Piraeus with Glaucon, the son of Ariston, that I might offer up my prayers to the goddess. Now, of course, he's a philosopher. So Socrates, what does Socrates mean when he says, I will offer up my prayers to the goddess? He doesn't really believe in prayer or the goddess. But also because I wanted to see what manner they would celebrate the festival. So he's curious. He wants to see the festival. Why do people do stuff like this? And he does say, which was a new thing. So he's curious about the new thing. The philosopher descends into the realm of the religious people, not because and I said this, the philosopher who does not believe in the goddess descends to participate and understand new ideas. He is not an acolyte, but he is curious. And that's that level of curiosity is, I think, what makes something like Joe Rogan's podcast powerful. I mean, is that even but it's meaningful, or people find meaning in it. It's the curiosity of the person hosting the dialogue. And so here you have Socrates, the philosopher, curious about what these religious people are doing. Plato writes him in as a character, almost in a play. He descends down to the Piraeus. He's with a rich young man of Athens, Glaucon, son of Ariston. So he has influence in the realm of the emerging generation of rich young rulers. Here's this old philosopher, Socrates. He's not terribly attractive, and yet what is attractive to these young men is his ability to handle ideas. And that's, I think, why good podcasting is good and why good philosophy is good. You sort of pick up the idea and you examine it, and you know that in examining the idea, you're not necessarily taking that idea on as your own. You're still examining it. And so I give a shout out to Warren Gage, who was my professor at Knox Theological Seminary, where I studied classics. Also, Louis Marcos, I had him on the channel. So if you want to look up, is it K-O-S, Marcos? If you want to look up the video that I did with Louis Marcos, Finding Jesus in Stranger Themes, we do talk about this. We talk about essentially the providential ordering of human history, even within the pagan world of someone like Socrates, that led them to prepare a fertile ground for the gospel to emerge in the Hellenistic world. And so I really appreciated Annie Crawford engaging with this conversation. She says, I am no Joe Rogan hater, but it's very important to realize that there is no essential virtue in mere dialogue. Okay, I thought that was a really... Okay, and I don't know if I 100% agree. I like the context here, but again, I'm approaching this as a Christian, as a person who believes that God spoke this world into existence. So there is something in the mere dialogue itself. But again, I appreciate Annie kind of pulling me off the ledge here and getting me to rethink my assumptions here. As Socrates and Plato knew quite well, dialogue is as much a way to deceive and confuse as it is a way to unearth the truth. But again, going back to the virtue of the dialogue, do you need virtue? Is it not true that the deceiver, the Satan, doesn't want to engage in dialogue, but only wants to deceive and lead people. There's something to that. Not engaging in the dialectic, but simply trying to undermine the message that has already been spoken with not the right kind of skepticism, but just a type of criticism. Did God really say? Did God really say? You know, that's not really engaging in the dialogue. But I do think there's something there. Dialectic is a highly skilled activity. You will notice in all the Platonic dialogue, Socrates is controlling the conversation and guiding it to a point. It's not all just free, open exploration and inquiry. And I agree. There's an interesting point here that I think probably someone like Lou Marcos would say, and I would say this, so I don't want to put words in Dr. Marcos's mouth, but having read his book, From Socrates to Christ, I believe is what it's called. Socrates is controlling the conversation, but who's controlling Socrates? We don't live in a closed system. We live in a system that is being influenced by the Spirit of God, and we live in a world that is guided by the providential hand of God. So who is inspiring Plato to write these dialogues and write Socrates in this way? That yes, Socrates is controlling the conversation and guiding it to a point, but isn't there a master chess player, right? Who's even beyond the Socrates? Socrates controls the conversation, but who is influencing Socrates? Who is in control of Socrates? Well, in that sense, Plato, the author, is, but then who is inspiring Plato? And I would say in a world where there is common grace, where even pagan philosophers can understand something true, just like secular songwriters or secular authors can really touch on themes of redemption, let's say, a Socrates, a Plato can very much explore those same ideas because we live in God's world. Socrates is not going down to the Piraeus with curiosity to learn from his interlocutors. He knows he has nothing. They have nothing to teach him. I read it differently. And Annie's probably way smarter than me on this, but I will say I do read it differently. I think Plato writes that Socrates goes down to the Piraeus because ultimately he does see the philosophy as the higher form, but I don't think that means he knows they have nothing to teach him. I think that is why he speaks to the youth. I'm not advocating for censorship here, but we are foolish to confuse skilled philosophical dialectic with open internet conversation. And there is truth to that for sure, but I hope that we can get better at it. And so thank you for the feedback. My optimism about dialogue comes from my trust in the providence of God and not the virtue of the individual, as I just said. God created the world with words. He created humanity with words. He commissioned us to be stewards of the message. While I agree that dialectic is a highly skilled activity worth developing, I also believe meaningful dialogue is possible because it is how we are designed. I see evidence of this in Plato's dialogues, my conversation with my 6-year-old, and Joe Rogan's podcast. And that's why someone like Douglas Murray just doesn't get it, right? His appeal to authority fell flat because we live, first of all, I do think we live in a world where I can learn something from my kids, right? Out of the mouth of babes comes the truth, right? So there is an innocence and there is a truth that comes out of these young people who haven't developed the skill, right? Dialectic is a highly skilled activity, and yet you can still learn from a child, can't we? So, and again, I appreciated Annie engaging on this topic, and sometimes I do this because sometimes in the text thread, it's like I can kind of get what I'm saying, but wholeheartedly agree. I don't think we're far apart in our views. And so, again, shout out to the internet dialogue where it's like, if you go back, like Annie's initial approach was like, have you even read Plato? Like, your ideas are so far off from my own. And yet, okay, actually, maybe we're not that far apart on our views. And so I think that's a testament to the fact that maybe we can do this well. But in our cultural discourse, we tend to idolize the power of free speech a wee bit much. It's necessary, but it is not sufficient. The heart of man is desperately wicked and deceitful above all else. Where our words are many, error is inevitable. Proverbs 10:19. Wow. Where words are many, error is inevitable, as is evident from me trying to even read that thing. Where hostility pursued words will lead us to truth. But I think you give men in general too much credit for genuinely seeking the truth. We need to give them a chance, even at great cost, but remain realistic and sober and wise. And I agree. So shout out to Annie Crawford. I don't think she has a YouTube channel. I think she has a Substack or something like that, but often will appear in these types of conversations. And so thank you for checking out this video. I will leave links and relevant information in the description, as well as suggesting future videos that you might be interested in. So thank you for the support that you show for this channel, and I'll catch you in the next one.